This is the Welcome to Humanity podcast with thought leader and transformative psychiatrist, Dr. Fred Moss. This show focuses on the betterment of humanity on a global scale. Each episode will leave you enlightened, inspired, and ready to make an impact in your world. Welcome to the show. Welcome to your life. Welcome to humanity. Here's Dr. Fred.
All right. Well, hello, and hello to our listeners. I think we have two sets of listeners at least, not to mention the sets of listeners that haven't heard either me or my guests before, and welcome to you as well. This is the Welcome to Humanity podcast. My name is Dr. Fred, and I am the host of the Welcome to Humanity podcast. I think this is approximately number 70 or so of the podcast that I have produced or created in the last little over a year. And today I'm really excited to introduce to you a guest who really is someone who's about to become, pretty sure about this, about to become a big part of my life. And almost seems like she's been here before I knew her. And so there's an opportunity to have a discussion with my guest, Diana Page Jordan. And even funny how I get to remember her name. And it's Diana is someone who we just met as Facebook friends, and we knew the right people, and that had us at least connecting, and then wondered how we knew each other, and then just splashed into having some really, really beautiful conversations over the past few months. So it just became appropriate and called for to have her on the Welcome to Humanity podcast. So Diana Page Jordan, welcome to the Welcome to Humanity podcast.
Yeah, it's a complete pleasure, Fred. Thank you so much. Dr. Fred, I should say. And you know, it's interesting. You mentioned names. This is my birth name, Diana Page Jordan. And most of the time people change the spelling up. So I have to go Diana like the princess, Page like in a book, Jordan like Michael, which actually says a lot about me because I became, I started as a broadcast journalist, really, search for truth. And that's taken me to a lot of beautiful places, you know, because I started interviewing authors on the side and did thousands of those interviews. And so it's a long and beautiful journey. And what I love about life is that nothing's wasted, even the pain. You go through certain things and you later, maybe it's hard going through it, but later you get to say, oh, that led me to this. Okay, I'm grateful. So that's kind of how I live my life.
Each and every one of us is really dealing with something, right? No matter whether we're tackling some of the big problems in the world or maybe even the tiny ones, we all face challenges. Now, I've been a psychiatrist for many years, and I've worked with all kinds of people from all walks of life. I've worked with more people than I can really count, from various backgrounds, dealing with more issues than you can imagine, of all sizes and shapes. So naturally, over time, I've developed a number of ways to assist others in gaining a new sense of freedom and empowerment. Now, I'm pulling back the curtain on one of those methodologies, and I'm going public, revealing the process and associated mindset that contributed to using this particular method with maximum effectiveness. It's all laid out in my new book called Creative Aid, Healing Through Creativity and Self-Expression. You can pick this book up on Amazon.com in either Kindle or paperback format. And as a listener to the Welcome to Humanity podcast, I'd like to offer you a completely free copy in audiobook format. Just go to welcometohumanity.net/creative and download your free audiobook copy of Creative Aid today. I really look forward to hearing about your Creative Aid breakthrough. Now, let's get back to this amazing conversation. Welcome to Humanity. It's really great, Diana. And I certainly struck by this comment that nothing is wasted in life, including the pain. And there's something about your journey up until now, which has included indeed, not just a broadcaster, you know, not just a journalist, and really not just an interview of, I think you are, you know, you tip the scales a little bit when you're talking about thousands of hours of interviews with authors. But, you know, there's something about that being consistent with who you are as a human, and then learning and growing and developing and then creating and listening and teaching, all the things that can happen through vocality, all the things that can happen through interactive conversations, whether they be in the written word or they be in the spoken word, or they be even in the audio visual world of electronics, or even you might remember the days when people actually used to be able to get together and personally, and actually be with each other and to hold hands or hug each other. And all of those things are things that you have really trafficked in pretty deeply to create the life you have now. What what led you? We'll look at the broadcaster thing. I think that's
Mhm.
the one that sort of comes off the page a little bit early on. Tell us a little bit about who you were, who you are as a broadcaster. What does that mean?
My search for truth began when I was like 7, okay? And so, but it took various forms. And when I was a kid, I'm like, well, maybe I'll be a teacher. And then when I learned that I could be a journalist, I went like, oh, then I can teach many people at once. So that's what I take. It's to
Mm,
inspire, it's to get to the closest truth, it's to ask sometimes difficult questions of people with whom I may not have the same beliefs of any kind, to say the least. I think some of the best work is done in this field of broadcast journalism when you ask not only difficult questions, but difficult questions of people who trigger something in you. And you're
mm,
talking to people who are 180 from each other, and you
mm,
want to get all that. What I wanted to do is get both sets of opinions in every story I did or every program I did, whatever, so that the listener, the viewer, would have an opportunity to choose what they truly believe
mm,
and added to what they already knew. Everybody's got filters, as we know, but it's really interesting when you get to ask these questions of people, and then you go, I just asked this person on this side of the spectrum this question. I got this answer. Okay, so now I'm going to ask someone with an opposing view the same question and see what comes back. And it's so fascinating because it enlarges my world. Hopefully, it will also enlarge the world of the viewers or listeners wherever I may be in that world. Um, I've done radio and TV, and I haven't done that in the last few years because I switched over. I pulled the best of what I loved, which is interviewing, over into another realm, which is book coaching. We could talk about that later. You asked about journalism. And I think the biggest responsibility is to, like I said, everybody has their own filters, but to give the most pure truth you possibly can pull from each individual whom you interview. I think
mhm.
that's critical, especially in our world today when people have so many options for sources. We used to say in journalism school, and that was a long time ago, consider the source and follow the money.
Mhm.
So if you use those as guiding points, you can often get at least closer to what's really, really going on.
Well, there's a lot of things that you're saying that I just adore, and really represent some degree of, I would say, courage. But there's this consistency that maybe you've not seen, but probably you have. And that is, this idea of nothing wasted, including the pain. Like,
Hmm.
really getting that comfort alone is only bringing you some small percentage of the actual story. If what you're looking for is simply an agreement reality, or what you're looking for is fuzzy cushy, if what you're looking for is something that's consistent with what you thought was so, and that we find ourselves rejecting an adversarial opinion, then we're really missing a grand truth of whatever is the purest truth. We're instead settling for what feels good or what resonates, and that alone doesn't create a good journalist, or doesn't even create a good storyteller, or certainly doesn't create any greater sense of what reality might have to offer in the grandest scheme. And this is there, you've said this now in about two or three spaces, that you almost seek out the, maybe not like asking for the pain, but absolutely inviting and embracing the pain of life as being a contributor to the grander truth, for sure. And then
It
there's this
comes out
other.
of
Go ahead, please.
I was going to say it comes out of curiosity.
Yeah,
Okay,
but sheer
what's going on here
curiosity.
and why? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Not pain, not poor me, none of that stuff. But it's more of, well, there might be a second of that, but really, it's what is going on here. What is this trying to teach me? What do I not know that I need to know? What's opening up? Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, the curiosity, I think we all would declare ourselves as curious, but some of us are curious only to hear what about people who agree with us. And, that's where the curiosity ends. And here, what I'm hearing is, to ask difficult questions of people who trigger us. Like,
Mm.
if I ask someone who really thinks that I know to be bad or wrong for sure, I mean, that they just don't know the truth yet. And in fact, they're standing for something that's either dangerous or bad or wrong or disagreeable. To be able to be open enough to ask those questions and then be open to the answers as being a key component to the truth actually takes somebody who's willing to put curiosity at the highest priority.
Hmm. It
Like
is not
curiosity
easy.
wins. Yes?
Yes, yes, that's very true. It is not easy because often we get triggered. Often we are like we go to that space of our earlier sense of, oh, this is wrong. But if you can step out of that, you catch the awareness, you step out of it and you go like, oh, what can I ask this person that will allow them to tell me what they are seeing, what they are experiencing. And even better than that, I love that question that Oprah now says is like, "What happened to you?" It's just like, yeah,
Yeah.
that's so true. That is
Yeah.
so true.
Yeah. We
Yeah.
we spend a lot of our time, and this week for me has been this week specifically, this theme has ridden hard this week. And this upcoming weekend I have this initiation where, and so much of what's happening for me is really taking a good hard look at how much of my life has, despite what I think, how much of my life has been based on pain avoidance or, pleasure seeking or pain avoidance.
Mhm.
And, although we might be naturally wired for those things, in some ways I've done those things at a very maximal level. I've really sought out pleasure and then found it, and then been able to ring the bell or get the dopamine hit or whatever comes with that, and avoided pain in many circumstances, um, in various ways, just because who wants pain, and why do I need to listen to that or do that or believe that, and now there's a space in my life, which is what the theme of Welcome to Humanity is all about, actually, is embracing all of reality as being, found fundamentally extremely valuable, like all of it, including the pain, or all of it,
Mhm.
including the triggerable adversary. And, all of those things, including those things, which might, they don't have their own natural draw. I'm not that eager in reality to find out what that person over there who disagrees with me has to say. But having now taken on this new, I'll say, adult approach to curiosity, I actually do become eager. It's like the
Mhm.
challenge or the willingness to hear people saying things that are otherwise very triggering, or doing or being things that are otherwise obviously like dead wrong or something, or at least in my fun opinion, um, really opens up life in ways that were otherwise, non-discoverable. And so you're a real proponent for that, it sounds like.
Yes, well, it comes out of, oh my gosh, I don't even know how to quantify it, but obviously thousands and thousands of hours of interviewing people from all, I mean, like, okay, so maybe we've got a riot and I've got to cover a riot, or maybe I've got this really fascinating author coming into town and I'm interviewing that person about some transformational concept. I mean, like, it runs the gamut, right? So I've had the opportunity to talk to so many different people. And what I found is when you are open and you ask a question and you allow yourself to hear the answer, well, you get so much out of it. It's like, it's so amazing. I should use the I form. I get so much out of it.
Hmm.
And for me, I don't know that you want to go down this road, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Hmm.
My earlier years were amazing up till age 3. My grandfather played the Stradivarius. My
Wow.
grandmother was she was a nurse, the head RN in the ER at Lenox Hill Hospital in Manhattan, and we lived in Manhattan for the first 3 years. My mother basically transitioned my real dad out of the picture, and I never saw him again, and ended up with this tall, dark, handsome type guy who apparently had quite a history himself. So what ended up happening to me was um, childhood rape.
Mm.
There was schizophrenia in the parents. There was alcoholism. There's a lot of violence, and so this little girl that I was like, why is this happening? I don't get it. I That is where I started reading. That is where I started carrying the books around when I was 3, 4, 5 years old, and like trying to understand, wanting to get closer to the truth. And it turned into, obviously, works great in school because then you become the A student. Okay, I'm gonna do it that way, right? But then when I got into journalism itself, and then some, I remember it was one time, it was the first time I'd ever done an author interview. And so I was doing the news, I was anchoring, and one of the women said to me, she goes, "I can't do this interview today. Can you take it on?" I go, like, "What is it?" She says, "Oh, it's just an author interview." Well, I'm thinking, just anyway. So she says, so I said, "Well, what is it?" She says, "It's an astrologer." I'm like, "But I haven't read the book." I said, "That's okay." She says, "Just go for it." So I did the interview with this astrologer, and I'm like, oh, wow. When we finished, I'm like, I have found it. I have found my joy,
Mm.
to be able to add, and it was quote unquote just an astrology book. But I ended up meeting so many fascinating people, and one by one, they helped me heal, you know. And even the hard news stories that I covered, I would take away something for myself as well as doing the story for the listeners, for the viewers.
Mhm.
And it became, I don't know, it's pretty darn amazing when you get to ask questions of people who have been there or have been in some form of where you've been, and you feel like you can't get out. Well, you can get out. You can get out.
Mhm.
And by listening to all these amazing people and taking away their wisdom and implementing it where I needed to in my life, it
Mhm.
became a transformation, I guess you would say.
Mhm.
And now I can bring the best of what I do. I can synthesize all those. The personal me is now healed. The professional me gets to play in this amazing big world. So
Mhm.
I'm
Yeah.
pretty darn grateful.
It
Yeah.
is. I get it. It's very, very beautiful. And and then now you have become someone who has had a lifelong list of opportunities of things that have actually unfolded in front of you, or for which you become part of, or in many cases for which you become the communication source for thousands or tens of thousands, maybe even millions of people about how things are going down, or how things went down, or what that person has to say or think about that. Sometimes in the high profile riots, or when there's massive disagreements, or fearful fearful, or maybe frightening life events that you have covered, but also
Mhm.
really exploring the minds of thousands of authors, and it's interesting that you just sort of drop in that your early childhood, and you're saying before 3 years old, um,
Mhm.
had these very sort of like the list of profound traumas that all of us wish we never could have, you have, or wish that there. It's like that isn't what you wish on people. The
No.
traumas that you had aren't the ones you hope everyone has. um just childhood rape, which there's schizophrenia, alcoholism, and violence. um One would think that that might lead someone fractured, and maybe forever fractured, like unhealably fractured. But for you, it seems like that 3-year-old got up and figured out, okay, how am I going to make sense of this world? Like, I need to be curious about what the hell is all this, and
Yeah.
then you've been pursuing that for your whole life.
Right. Yes. I I feel graced. I'm grateful. I really do. And I think it's because part of it is because the first 3 years were the glorious violin music. And the kindness of my grandparents, and the love of my father and mother. And so I had that as I felt as a resource, as a foundation that I had, even
Hmm.
though the foundation seemed to be blown up, like, right after that.
Hmm.
So, but I still stayed with the idea of it was a form of curiosity. It was like, I don't understand, why is it so different? Why are these things happening? I don't get it, you know?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I'm going to have to be open and ask questions. Well, I pretty much closed my voice off at that point, which I
Hmm.
eventually got back by doing the work that I do. So
Hmm.
sometimes it's putting yourself in really tough places too,
Hmm.
because, how am I going to create a livelihood when I'm afraid to ask somebody anything?
Hmm.
That's where I started right after, like in school, I'd raise my hand if nobody else was asking the teacher something. I didn't want the teacher to feel bad, so that was another thing. Yeah. So I would raise my hand. But like after that, after school, it was just like, okay, so now
It
I'm in
was
the world.
girls like you I used to laugh at. I mean, and because I'd be doing some version of that from the boy end. I'd raise my hand and
Yeah.
crack a joke or just kind of fracture the room, sort of to help the teacher out who was sitting there kind of all alone. And but girls like you who would
Yeah.
ask the perfect question to the teacher so that she or he, could keep going. Yeah. Yeah. What is that? What you were doing? Were you kind
Yeah.
of like
Yeah. And
assisting the teacher?
I guess so. Yeah, I guess so. I guess so. But the point being that I had no voice. I
Right.
closed my voice off way back then. And at the same time, I felt the compulsion. I don't know if that's the right word. Desire, need, want to be a journalist. And so that pushed me. I knew I knew that this was my career. I knew some form of it, the writing, the speaking, the asking the question, whatever form it took, because I've done pretty much all the forms. Um, and so I stayed with that. I stayed with that was the thing that kept me going. It
Hmm.
was kind of fun. Like, what's the real truth? What is going on here? And for other people who may be going through pain like I went through as a child, God bless you. I'm like really sorry that you're going through this. And at the same time, be curious, ask the questions, find a place where you feel safe and open up. And I don't know. I don't know what else to say to that.
Yeah.
It's not easy. I know it's not easy.
No, it's not easy. It's very, very pure and it's very human. And it's back to the word courage. It really is. There's something, or it's like I hear you being an advocate for find your safe place and then ask questions, like like properly cautiously curious, like not just caution to the wind, like really just like finding a space for which asking these questions is can bring answers that you can absorb into your life.
Yeah.
There is a
Yes.
security and a safety that has to be generated in order to ask those questions and then be able to receive the answers and metabolize them. No, like you got to find that safety to speak from in order to actually ask the questions and be able to hear the answers.
Yeah. Well said, Dr. Fred.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a thing about, asking the questions and getting the check mark for asking the questions and not even hearing a 1 second of what the answer was is one way to get through the interviewing process.
It's funny you say that. James Patterson, everybody knows him. I was interviewing him this one time, and what I would do is I wouldn't have questions written down. I would have read the book, and I might have a few bullet points in my brain that I was going to hit. But basically, I'd listen and ask the next question off the answer that I got. And so he told me this one time. He says he liked that, right? He liked that. But then he said to me, he says, I really like to mess with people. I'm like, what are you talking about? He says, well, people ask me a question. They're not listening to the answer. So I'll give them some made up crazy answer and they'll keep going. They'll keep asking. He says, all I can do is imagine what it'd be like when they get back to the editing room and listen to all those crazy answers I gave
Hmm.
them, but I don't know. He's
Yeah,
a character. He's a
it's
character.
funny. It is funny. I think we have this idea of it's almost like I need to turn down my mind even when I'm interviewing you right now. There's an interview process here that has me already as soon as I'm done speaking my question or whatever insight I'm delivering into our space, and you start talking. There is a big part of me that is already preparing for what it is I'm going to say next.
Yes.
And when I'm doing that, I'm truly not listening very much to what it is you are saying to me, that I'm pretending at the very best, at the very least, I'm pretending to catch on to. So when we stay visual, like for our listeners, we should let them know that we're seeing each other right now, but the tape is going to be audio only. I do notice that when interviewing you and having you on my screen, there is a greater intimacy. There is a
Hmm.
capacity for me to get a feedback loop going, to have like how you look or what your expressions are, or where your eyes go, or your smile, or your concern, or your furrowed brow or something, that there's something that I can build my question on that is over and above the content
Mhm.
that's dripping out of my mouth. There's something like I get to do this contextually and maybe more intimately take on the questions, the hard questions that we're struggling with right now, that we're challenged with right now. Is that how do you work that into your own interviews or your own journalism or even your own broadcasting on TV or radio?
Well, honestly, I do prefer the visual, even though I've worked most of my years in radio. But honestly, most of the time, I'm out on a story, like in the old days, right? Out on a story, or in the same room with the microphone and the tape recorder. Obviously, now it'd be like with the whole setup and in studio, which would be great to have that again. But Zoom, I mean, that to me, that was a blessing of Zoom, because I'm used to doing all the audio, but then you get to see somebody you do, like you mentioned before, you get all the different textures and you get all the different, you get the nuances.
Hmm.
And sometimes it's easy to blow past the real truth because you're not noticing.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, one of the phrases that I think I got to push into here that it really turned me on about a course that I did that probably some of our listeners have done or heard of it as well, called Being a Leader, which is there is when being a leader, there is a component that includes taking into consideration the concerns of all relevant parties.
Hmm.
And that's how the phraseology goes. It's like, no, really, all relevant, including those guys, including that person,
Right,
including the
right.
one that you absolutely can't tolerate. Like really getting that what did you call it? Purest truth. I recently did a breakout session on, how do you know what you know was the name of the breakout session.
Oh, I love that name.
And it's also the article that I wrote. Interestingly enough, it's the article I wrote this year, and that's the title of it. I guess I'll get that to you later today. And so how do you know what you know is a really interesting question, right? And in the breakout session, what was there was 60 or 80 people there. What people got is that some sort of weird notion of different levels of truth. Oh, there's your truth, my truth, and the truth. There's the real truth and the truth that I see through my filter. There's the truth that I say is so and the truth that's really so. There's the universal truth and then the three-dimensional truth. It's like, and there's
Wow.
something about what is really, when you use the word, can I ask you, when you did use it earlier, seeking the purest truth.
There,
What is that?
for me, there's a place I sometimes find myself where I'm not sure exactly how to put this. Here, the words, it just comes in, right? We call it download sometimes, we call it divine sometimes, we call it inner voice, whatever. But I know that for me, it comes in at an angle, like
Hmm.
I'm pointing to the
Mhm.
the top of my head. It comes in that I don't know what the brain looks like. I've often
Mhm.
looked at pictures like, what is that part of my brain where But at any rate, for me, that's where it comes in. It's there's a purity to it. It's not an ego thing. It's not I want something. It's more in the space of, oh, so I get a few words, I see some of the picture, and it gives me what seems to be the perfect fit for that inquiry that I had just expressed.
Mhm. So when things yeah, so the perfect fit is like it snaps into place or it resonates at the same chord, or the wrinkles are ironed out or the questions are answered, those kinds of things that represent the perfect fit in a conversation. Help me out with this. I've
Well,
interviewed a
I
fair
have a
amount of.
sto-
Yeah, go ahead,
I have
please.
a I have a story that will
Yeah,
probably illustrate
I'm
this.
ready.
Okay.
Great.
Okay. So I'm interviewing Richard Carlson. His books were Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, and we had interviewed a few times on his various books, and So I'm hearing this in my head, like I mentioned before, it was very sweet and pure. It's like a whisper, ask him the question. And by then we'd finished the interview, right? The interview was over, and I'm still hearing this voice, ask him the question. So finally I'm thinking, I can't keep him here much longer physically. He's about to leave the studio. And so I said, Richard, I don't know why I'm going to say this, but I will. I'm hearing I should ask you this question, and I don't know what it is yet. So let's just chit chat for a little bit and see if it comes up. He goes, okay. So he was an amazing man, just a huge heart. Anyway, so all of a sudden it hits me, and I'm like, Richard. At this point, I had a local radio station. I was doing my author show on that local station, um, and it was I I thought to what I really wanted was to go national, but it wasn't like thought through, right? But I did want to do something a little bit bigger. So I'm hearing ask him the question. So I said, Richard, I said, I would love to do my show nationally. I said, do you know of anything? He says, oh. I go, what do you mean? Oh, he says, can I use your phone? I'm like, okay. So he says, just a minute, I'll be right back. So he goes, uses the phone, comes back. He says, I called AP Radio Network because the guy that was doing Between the Lines had told me a few days ago that he was giving notice, even though he's done it for like over 10 years. He doesn't want to do it anymore, or he can't do it anymore, whatever. Anyway, he's leaving, and they need somebody to anchor and produce the
Wow.
show. I'm like, cool. So I sent my tape. They said yes. I was in with before the week was over,
Wow.
all out of listening to that. Ask him the question,
Yeah.
you know? And I mean, it went out to 800 stations. It was a daily show. It was Monday through Saturday, and for AP Radio Network, 800 radio stations. It's like crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There is this. So now I'm gonna let's see if I switch or maybe I'm deepening the exploration here. There's a power of listening is what I hear you emanating from you. So and now I'm hearing that listening isn't just listening to the person who's answering or who's responding or reacting to the question or the world around them, not just that person, but there's a listening to the greater truth or listening to the universe as it downloads.
Mhm.
And then there's a listening to me, both my big self, my capital S self, but even my ego self. And then, like, there's a whole symphony here of things to listen to
Yeah.
when I'm talking to somebody or when I'm talking to myself or when I'm creating what's new. And it sounds like, you know, mm, this was providential that you had what you had here, this download into ask the question with the man was about to create your next chunk of career in your life with,
Yeah.
in that week, in that moment that
Yes.
simply wasn't there until you asked the question
Exactly.
and then became your life. The other day, well, a couple weeks ago, I interviewed maybe someone you know. Do you know Sheila James?
No, I don't.
Yeah,
No.
what a cool interview and what an amazing, amazing woman she is. And she has a story like that too, that essentially landed her in Atlanta and her whole life has been built as a function of going down to Atlanta to be with Coretta Scott King. Anyways,
Ooh,
it's quite something, quite a something story. She's amazing.
wow.
I can't wait till the two of you get together. And if Sheila, if you're hearing this, that yeah, I'm the one to put the two of you together. Anyways, the so yeah, back to listening. 2 years ago, the article I wrote was called "The Sound of Listening," and there's
Mhm.
something about what is listening in its broadest sense, and what is its interface and contribution to this notion of the purest truth. That's a question for you.
Okay. One more time, say that.
So, what is listening in its broadest sense? And what is its contribution to this radical notion of exploring and, seeking the purest truth? where does listening, and who are you listening to, and what are you listening for, in order to get us or you closer to a pure truth?
Oh boy, that's a great question. So, the biggest piece of it, Fred, Dr. Fred, is being open and not immediately coming up with your own mental questions, et cetera. You're staying with it. You ask the question, you stay with it, and you see what comes from the other person, and you hear what comes from the other person. And if you have to go, like, in your mind, if you have to go, like, if I don't ask this question, I'm going to forget it. Just jot down a word, on a piece of paper, but stay with that person, and and be open. I feel like a lot of times we are guided to ask really key questions no matter where we are, so as to open up a piece of ourselves, a place in our hearts, with that truth that you're speaking of. And it's not it's I don't think it's an ABC 1 2 3, something that you can tell people how to do, but I feel like it's, if we can be quiet in our minds enough to hear the other person, and and just be with them,
Hmm.
you'll get it,
Hmm.
and it opens up everything and builds that connection between the people, and that is, I think, truly listening. Well, you must know that as a doctor,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Well, I don't know that I know it as a doctor, but I know it as a 63-year-old human, and I'm always refining it and getting better at it. I still see myself as being pretty elementary in the area, but the idea is the reacting that we'll call, as opposed to responding. There's the
mhm.
reacting or the flinching or the impulsiveness or the, oh, I got, or, like, I want to hear myself speak into this. I want to be me, the ego aspect of this that has me want to one up you or who I'm speaking with, um, needs to be recognized and contended with, and perhaps contained, or at least properly acknowledged, so that I can sit and be with the other person.
Yes, and I feel also that when we are open and give the other person access to be able to give what they want to say, then they also tend to give us space for what we want to say, and it becomes a collaborative conversation, from which enormous ideas can be born. And I
Hmm.
think that's the beauty of it.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's hard to restrain yourself. I get that, but
It,
at the same time, yeah.
yeah, it is this delay, like okay, hmm like blurting, um, doesn't necessarily feel like blurting when it's blurting. Blurting feels like, oh, it's time for me to speak right now. And retrospectively, it might look like I blurted, or it might be like, and like, oh, I spoke a little bit too soon there, and stopped listening to where the conversation was going. And it seems like a human trait, like everyone can understand it, but it does sort of, gosh, it does sort of put a stopper on, true and full exploration for a pure truth.
Mm. And I believe what you're speaking to is that self-judgment that pops up
Hmm.
when it's sort of the paradigm of abundance versus the fear of not having enough. Like, if when you're staying in the space of abundance and the joy of hearing another person speak, oh my gosh, that's so contagious. It just really is.
Hmm. It really
So,
is.
and it's fun and it's delightful and it opens up more, and you will get not only your words spoken, but you'll get the best part of your words spoken,
Hmm.
because it opens up other things in your head. It's not constrained to, I need to say these 5 words before in the next pause that the person makes, you know.
That's interesting. Is it a function of our formal education? I'm trying to, I find myself naturally going back to, when did I start because I was a pain in the neck to all of my teachers. I made it very clear that I was going to be one each year that the school started, all the way to kindergarten, and there's no elementary or junior high or high school teacher who doesn't remember that I was in their class. That's what I like to think. And and normally what it was is because I was really funny. that I was really funny. And I was rambunctious, I was mischievous, and I made myself known on the side. And the way I did that is because I had a reasonable intellect that could
Hmm.
excel in the basic needs of the course. Like I could, quick with math, and I was quick with words, and then I could be a pain in the neck to my teachers. There was, I
What
think,
did,
go ahead.
what did you think about yourself?
When I was doing that, what did I think about myself?
Yeah.
I thought I was really, in some ways, I thought it was fraudulent. In some ways, I really loved getting the attention.
Hmm.
In other ways, I even enjoyed being punished, sent to the principal's office, or, told to be quiet, or put in the corner, or have my desk turn around, or, you know, um, all those things. They were like feathers in my cap. Like, I was a little bit of a rebel. I got rebel
Hmm.
stripes. And um, I knew that I was smart, and I knew that I was tall. And in some ways, this was my way to make sure that I wasn't going to be ruled out. I wasn't going to be ostracized from the main group. Like this was a way to have people like me, even if I was smart, kind of thing.
Oh, interesting. So that old herd thing that we hear about in biology, where we want to be liked, so we're not ostracized from the tribe. That's what you're saying,
Definitely, that's
basically.
definitely what I'm pointing to, for sure. And for me, smoking marijuana, that was when I found marijuana, or when marijuana found me in midway, early high school. That was what that purpose served. That was like that served a purpose. It was like I could get high, and then I would become, it seemed like I had a culture waiting for me, that I could get high and have fun and not be the heady valedictorian that I could have been. Like I had enough in going on that I could have graduated at least top, I don't know, 5 or 10 in my class. And instead I graduated like 266th in my class. And it's hilarious that I'm 266. We only had like 520 in the class. I graduated like middle of the class. And
Yeah.
um for it's that's inappropriate that I'm in the middle of that class. It's good enough. I've
Hmm.
had a great education. I found my way through other things I found my way through, but in the struggle of being part of everyone, and having that be almost more important than seeking out the front edge truth that I knew that was waiting for me, has been a struggle my whole life, maybe even up until now.
So I'm hearing the rebel word
Yeah.
pop through all of this. How do you use that today?
Hmm. I think that the rebel now is exactly what we're doing here. I'm a physician, and I'm an out of the box physician. I am the world's first non-diagnosing, non-medicating psychiatrist. And I rebel against the machine in some ways, the industrial complex, and maybe the medical or psychiatric industrial complex. And over time, I think what I've learned to be is individual enough to carry on outside of the box without necessarily being violent or a threat to those who are inside of the box. So I've utilized
Hmm.
all of my resources over time to be recognizable and non-dismissible from the middle of the box. Like I indeed master the middle of the box enough that I can't be overlooked at all.
Got it.
And then I
That's
also
interesting.
am so far out of the box, and somehow straddle that in a way that moves the conversation forward. So my rebellion gets embedded in the fact that I'm also conventionally non-dismissible.
I love that. That's a great line. You should write it down.
You should write it down.
Okay. So,
What did I say? My rebellion. It's being
it
recorded.
was at 42 minutes.
Yeah, 42 minutes.
That's
And
how I do.
Ryan,
Yeah.
Ryan, take notes.
So what I would like to say to this is you posed a question earlier on, and that was basically how to really listen to the other person without talking over them. And for me, it came out of the training with the microphone, because if you've got your mic, holding your mic in front of you so you can ask the question, and then you put the mic under the other person's chin for the answer, then you want the whole answer. And what I've learned so many times is sometimes you'll ask a question and they'll answer maybe a sentence, and then they'll pause, and you'll go like, okay, wait for it. Just wait for it. And then the next thing they say will be like, holy smoke, that was what you're waiting for. That is the beautiful line that explains everything, that just you're going to use that in the produced piece. You're just gonna.
Well, you just really did a beautiful and delicate example of that right here with me. And so you could say you turned the tables, but this exploration of the term rebel and then getting me to deliver a line that is worth writing down and keeping is sort of your super skill. And I think you just gave our listeners and myself a pretty beautiful example of where that skill lies. That I hear rebel, and where does it apply now? And how do I incorporate it? Is And then really getting me to say something I even have never said before. I didn't know that that's exactly at least how I have constructed this coping mechanism, or this style of this style of a winning formula. Like, how do
Mhm.
I like, this works for me to do that. This now works. I now get to be who I am as a function of having incorporated that super style, that machinery, into how I interact with the world. And you were able to tap that, probably using your thousands of hours or tens of thousands of hours of experience in exploring for a purer truth. All the way from child to journalist and broadcaster, author, and then also, interviewer. So what's here for you now? You're at a cool place in your life, and it seems like things are unfolding in new ways. That the flower called Diana is unfurling in new ways. What are you up to?
Yes, and thank you for asking that. It is, I think, for many people when they hit a certain age, I'll just say certain age, when you've kind of learned everything that you need to learn in your field, and you're going like, okay, what do I do next? And all of a sudden you realize, oh, I want to take the best of what I've become, and I want to create something new. And it takes a lot of, it's hard to do. It really is hard to do. So what I've been doing is one of the things that I've been doing is writing my memoir, which is tentatively called Bookmarks, From Mitch Albom to Moon Unit Zappa: How I Saved My Life by Interviewing Authors I've Known and Sometimes Loved. And I've got an agent waiting for it. I'm in my last revisions, and a lot of the stories that have changed my life are in that book. And my prayer is it's that the reader will connect with the stories and go like, oh, I can do that. Oh, I'm safe. I don't feel safe, but I'm safe.
Hmm.
Um, and to move forward that way. And it's been an absolute delight. I was so fortunate because at some point, this was another piece of serendipity, because I love serendipities, don't
Me
you?
too. Yeah, I
Yeah.
do. I do.
So like this one day, I'm driving home from the radio station, and I get a phone call back from Chuck Palahniuk, who wrote Fight Club. And I thought he was just responding to a message I'd left him a couple months earlier, and I'd interviewed him 3 or 4 times on his various books. And so he says to me, well, okay, well, how are you doing? What are you up to? What are you up to? At that very second, a white Lexus comes into my view with a license plate that says Write, Write. And I'm
Wow.
like, oh my God, yeah, exactly. And he says, whoa, what's going on? Are you okay? I'm like, yes. And then I described it. He says, there's this big pause, and he says to me, are you in a writing group? And I said, no. He goes, well, he says, you are now. He says, we do a workshop every week, and I'm inviting you. And I stayed for 9 years. And
Hmm.
so I wrote the first version of the memoir there. Timing wasn't right. The writing was great, the publishers said, but the timing's right now, because I feel like there's so many people who don't have a voice, and it is so critical for each of us to be able to speak out in our own ways, and hopefully in a positive way. As I said, that to speak out, I suddenly flashed on January 6th and the riots. But if those people had had a different avenue to express what they wanted, maybe they wouldn't have done the violence. And I think oftentimes we are led to violence if we don't figure out a way to express what we believe, what we know, what we want to put out in the world. And I'm not going to make a comparison to that anymore. It just flashed through my mind, so I wanted to express it. But I feel like the important thing is to feel safe in the world, to get your words out there. And when you write, for example, oh my gosh, you have so much power in that. If you do morning pages like Julia Cameron designed, which I've done for decades, I've got stacks and stacks of legal pads. You get into a practice of writing, and you get all those emotions out on the page.
Mm-hmm.
They don't stay in you and grow ugly things. You get them out on the page, and you go like, oh, that's what's going on. Oh, there's some wisdom there.
Mm.
And you get to create who you are instead of by default the pains that you encounter in your life. So it becomes joyous.
Yeah. And circulating. It's so much. What I'm hearing is that it's not just an outlet, but it continues the circuit. It's like the circuit of experience gets spat out through your hands or through your writing, and then gets to be chewed on, metabolized, and then grown, and then grown upon afterwards. Is something like that. I am so curious as to what your practice right now is on your daily writing when you're not already doing an assignment that you've been hired for. How do you work writing, or what is your personal practice to incorporate writing into your daily life?
Get up around 5:15, 5:45, somewhere in that sweep, right? And the first thing I do is journal, and then I meditate. And then I have an early call for one of my clients, but I'll do that. Then I'll mix in an hour of dance or high impact or something like that. And then I'll go back to, but the point being, the first part of the day is very quiet and very connected.
Mm-hmm.
So getting the words out on the page and then meditating. And then sometimes I'll go back and write some more because they're like, oh, these things kind of fell together. So I want to write more about that. I want to get that out onto the page.
Mm-hmm.
And then usually every once in a while, I'll look at like, what was yesterday? I usually don't look back, but every once in a while, the journal will open to a certain page. I'm like, oh my gosh, I've grown so far past that. And it's only been like a week,
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
I think that is part of our process. If we get it out of ourselves onto the page, if that's the best space for you. Some people like to talk it out, but in any case, in writing, there is this. Maybe you know about this. I've read studies where when you're writing with a pen, for example, instead of typing, there's a deeper connection. But at any rate, that's what I use.
Yeah,
I have
I was going to
favorite
ask.
pens.
That was really,
Yeah.
and I told you I'm always looking for my next question, so you kind of stole it, and so now I get to talk about the fact that you stole my next question. This is like my
Oh no.
go-to. Yeah, my go-to like secondary question is to point to the fact that you just stole the question that I otherwise thought would have been brilliant to ask. So
I'm sorry. I shouldn't laugh. That's hilarious. I didn't steal it.
The way that, and it was going to ask you about your experience of the electronic writing versus, you mentioned a stack of legal pads or journals. Is journaling, if I buy an app that's called, journal.com or something, or if I, find a program that allows me to, type my experience, that's quite a bit different, isn't it, than taking out my pen or my pencil or, and writing it into, just I have this thing, for instance, I have this just write. This one's
Hmm.
called Just Write One Thing Today. And
Hmm.
I'm just really not that good at it. My coach wants me to do it every day. Coming through school, writing just seemed like a hassle. And then, I stopped doing it, and maybe, whatever little stories I have. But I do notice now that all I really have to do is pick up a pen and start writing. And it's quite a different organic experience than typing away in Word or Google Docs or something, what I think my thoughts are. What is your experience with comparing electronic writing and to writing?
With the pen, something magical occurs. It feels like there's a closer connection between what's really going on deep inside. And sometimes, honestly, I'll get some of those downloads that we were talking about earlier. So that is beautiful. I would say, for a first draft, totally. I love typing too, but it's a different kind of it's cleaner, it's neater, it's more I mean, thank God we don't have to X things out anymore, right? But
Hmm.
in the old days,
Yeah.
you'd have to X out whole lines, and now you can just, you're done. But when I am searching to be connected with the essence of something, then I'm going to write with my pen in a book, and it's going to be quiet, and all my notifications are going to be turned off, hopefully. I'm going to be in that space. And then when it's time to, like, okay, so I've, like, for example, my memoir, I printed it all up, and I've got pen changes all through it. Then when I go back to type in the changes, it'll be cleaner, it'll be neater, it'll be tidier. But I already have the inspiration on the paper. So
Hmm.
now I'm forming it so that it's edited.
Hmm.
It's more. So I feel like the keys are great for when you're at the editing stage, but when you're getting the words out, there's nothing more delightful than sitting there with a pen and just drawing or scripting, what it is that you want.
Hmm.
I think some people are blessed with the ability to draw pictures, and that says it all for them, and others are, with a pen, and that works too.
Hmm.
But yeah,
Yeah.
first draft pen, second draft typing. That's what I do.
We talked earlier about how do we know when something, I forgot the exact backdrop, but it was something about, the resonating, or, the fit, it just clicks in, it fits, it's right, it's complete, the wrinkles are ironed out. I am wondering, how do you know you're done writing what it is you wrote?
That is such a great question because so many people will think, oh, just one more thing, just one more revision, and it'll be fine. And there's a point at which you have to say, you know what, this is good enough.
Good
And then
enough.
good enough. And then you pass it on to the, because what's going on is your ego mind is going like, oh, may not be good enough yet. And you have to
Hmm.
say to yourself, you know what, I've been through this 13 revisions or whatever, and there's nothing glaring here, and
Hmm.
things feel about right. So I'm going to call it good, and I'm
Hmm.
going to put another set of eyes on it and send it to somebody, to an editor or an agent, or whoever may be waiting for that
Hmm.
document.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Awesome. Diana, I know, we had an agreement that you would be out of here in about 6 minutes, so we're going to start tapering down this conversation. I wonder, our listeners are going to be very curious about how they can either catch up with you or follow you or learn from you or hire you or talk to you or be like you or stay away from you or whatever they have. And so how can they find you? How can they then make a determination of what to do once they can find you?
Oh, that's so lovely. Thank you. My email's simple. It's dianapagejordan@gmail.com. Like I said before, Diana like the princess, Page like in a book, Jordan like Michael @gmail.com. I also have a website, dianapagejordan.com. And then I'm on LinkedIn. And I do have social media. I'm just getting back to kicking it up again because I did TV reporting in northern New York for a little bit, and then when I came back to Portland, Oregon, I'm like, I had stopped doing the social media like before I moved. So at any rate, I'm kicking that back up again. So I've got Instagram and Twitter. I've at Diana Inspires for those, and then I think I'm going to stick with my real name. So it's easy enough. Diana Page Jordan @gmail.com or .com for the website. So yes,
Beautiful.
yeah.
That's great. So there's all sorts of, what a great conversation that we've had. And, some of the things that, there's some things like, your family or what matters to you now outside of this range. But I think this conversation really taps into many different ways, like, the culmination, if you will, or the self-expression that has grown out to be how you wound up being. Like there's at least a little piece of you here that can, fit into the greater lattice. And I, for one, remain very curious. to learn what your greater lattice is, like having now gotten the agreeable parts of how it is that you were forged and molded and sculpted to being in who you've become. The broader base picture of who you are is, it's inspiring. There's something like leaves curiosity for this listener. And I think I'm probably speaking to all the listeners, for all the listeners. It's like, who is this woman? Like, what else is here? What parts can also be uncovered and explored, the beauty of your life as it unfolds, and really the mastery, and, that you found yourself in a space where you could have a great life and be a massive contribution at the same time. And it seems to me like you really were able to create that, or have been able to create that in this life. So I congratulate you, and really am honored to have run into you and now get to, have this beautiful conversation with you, and for obviously future conversations that are right around the corner. So thank you, Diana, for coming on and for sharing yourself with our listeners.
Thank you, Dr. Fred. As I said at the beginning, it's been a complete pleasure. I expected a pleasure. It has been a pleasure.
Good.
So, yes, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Has been great. And thank you. It's a little early to say I love you, but I'll say it anyways. And, because, life goes on. Life is short. So when you love someone, you should let them know. So I do love you. And it's really great to meet you and be with you. Thank you for coming on. Welcome to Humanity. And listeners, thank you for staying in this wonderful conversation with Diana Page Jordan and myself. It's been a pleasure to be with you, and it's really a pleasure to be a human, isn't it? I mean, it really is. It's,
yeah.
All things considered, and I mean all those things considered, it really is a pleasure to be a human, isn't it?
It's all about that love.
It really is.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Diana.
Dr.
Thanks,
Fred.
listeners. Catch you on the backside. Bye for now.
Hey, welcome to Humanity Family. It's Ryan Levesque here, co-producer of the show. I truly hope you enjoyed Dr. Fred's in-depth conversation today. If you did, and if the conversations we share each week are making a difference for you, could you please take just a moment to leave a rating and a short review on Apple Podcasts? Your enthusiastic review helps new listeners discover the show. Your support here really does make a difference. I'd also like to invite you to reach out to a friend or two who would appreciate today's episode. Maybe shoot them a quick text or email, or maybe pick up the phone and invite them to subscribe to the Welcome to Humanity podcast so they can be enriched from the discovery of amazing ideas and insights each week. As always, you can find past episodes along with the complete show notes and links at welcometohumanity.net/podcast. If you'd like to explore how working one-on-one with Dr. Fred can help you break through whatever challenges you might be facing with your mental health or well-being, leading to new levels of freedom and vitality, I invite you to reach out to us directly by emailing drfred@welcometohumanity.net. That's drfred@welcometohumanity.net. Thanks so much for listening, and keep an ear out for another captivating conversation next week. Have a beautiful day, a beautiful week, and indeed, a beautiful life. Welcome to Humanity.